All right, good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. So, wrapping up what was really kind of a lackluster trading week for the most part, just in terms of um, it was basically a slow grind higher all week. Volume really dried up and has sort of been drying up since right after the holiday break. So, this is not too terribly uncommon. Now, what I'm looking at going into next week is, the first big earnings that we'll have really of the year with Netflix. So Netflix reports earnings on Thursday, and I think that's really going to be sort of pivotal in, if this rally will resume or if this is just, ultimately just a bounce before, more selling. So, without getting too much into that, really just the longer term stuff, I do want to just spend most of this video talking about, Netflix and, what I'm positioned for kind of going into earnings next week. So, if you've ever traded around earnings, it can be really a crapshoot. Um, sometimes a company can have, phenomenal fundamentals, everything's going fantastic, and the stock gets hammered. And a lot of times you'll see the inverse of that. But, unlike most times, I think there's a lot bigger things at play here. We're just coming off one of I think maybe the bloodiest um, December, ever, or if not, one of the most. And I mean figuratively, obviously, but looking at Netflix here, it's had, really a rough go of it since, really since June. Netflix has been selling off, and in the last just couple of days, it's had just a massive move off the low. But I just think that this is sort of just a bounce before the selling resumes here in Netflix. Netflix. Um, I don't, I use Netflix. I like it as a service, and there's a lot to say about it. It was really the first big one on the stage to offer streaming, and now you have things like Prime, Disney's getting into streaming. I mean, there's Hulu, HBO, Showtime. I mean, everyone's offering their own kind of streaming service now, so there's just so much competition. And like I said, with Disney getting in the game, just another huge player now involved. And so for someone like Netflix, who has always been pretty heavy in debt, it becomes increasingly hard, um, to make money. I saw something the other day where Netflix is spending an obscene amount of money just to keep Friends um, on board. And, I mean, that's kind of the game of it, is just all these licenses to get these movies are incredibly expensive. And so they're constantly having to add tons and tons of new subscribers. And last time that they raised prices, there was huge backlash. So anyway, I just, overall, I am not overly bullish Netflix in the long term. So what I did going into today was sell some longer dated call spreads in Netflix. So I sold the out of the money 350, 355 call spreads on Netflix. So that gives me just a little bit of breathing room. If Netflix for whatever reason does move up next week, and not to say that's out of the picture, but to me, just based on what I've talked about, it's hard for me to imagine that any kind of investor or big time trader is going to come into this and say, yeah, I want to be in Netflix long term. So you can see just from this high to low swing here, we've cleared these first two levels and did clear this 34 EMA. So this does open the door, for some continuation or, more bullish activity. So, looking at the next levels, 349.87. So like I said, I sold the 350, 355 call spreads. I have 63 days on those, so those expire in March. So I have plenty of time for that to kind of play out, and that's what I'm looking at there in Netflix, is just over the longer term. I just don't expect to see much higher prices in Netflix. We've had this big bounce, but you can kind of see here. Now, I don't pay a ton of mind to trend lines. I once, used them a lot, but they're just so subjective. It's really hard, um, to believe in them. Now you can see that this downtrend aligns pretty nicely with this 349.87 area. So from where we are now or where we closed at, I mean, that's still a decent um, move up. So there is, the possibility that I take some heat on, um, on these options that I've sold, but it's not much. I mean, it's about a 3.25 so move, 3% that is. So, it's within a tolerance that I'm willing to take. And like I said, with just this massive kind of moves day after day in Netflix, um, I just really think that, it's far from over in terms of the selling. And if we go back to just the weekly chart here, um, you can see that, I mean, we could go as low as like 211, and that's a 50% of some really longer term moves here. And that aligns pretty nicely with this 34 EMA. Now, I don't know how long it'll take to get there, but I really think that that's where we could be heading there in Netflix. So, that's what I'm kind of looking at going into earnings next week. One thing to keep in mind is you don't want to be buying options around earnings just because the premium is so high next week. So the implied volatility next week is 82.5 and then falls off the next week to 67. So, the nice thing with this is that with Netflix reporting earnings on Thursday, those options that expire next week, the IV on those basically just gets crushed. So I will be looking probably next week to sell volatility on Netflix, just because, like I said, any kind of uh, you know, every time, with earnings, you have this increase in it, and then the day after it just gets crushed. So it's just a type of strategy you can use around earnings. And, going into this really is kind of a pivotal time uh, for the markets as a whole. And let me just kind of wrap it up with this. So, looking once again at the indexes, we are at sort of this point where we've had a nice bounce off the lows, but we are, from at least a daily perspective, right at the mean. So this could break higher and, have a nice kind of rally to start the year. Or, is 2019 going to be more of what we saw in December? I think, next week is really going to be telling for the weeks to come. So anyway, that's what I've got. Hope you have a nice weekend, and I will talk to you all next week. If you're enjoying these videos, please subscribe. It motivates me to keep doing them. Take care.